Shalom, everyone. I'm Josiah Geoffrey.
I'm Hosea Geoffrey.
Welcome to Solid Scripture, where the whole discussion is totally by the book. Today, we're continuing our walk through the Bible in the book of Joshua. Today's reading goes from Joshua 15:1 through 19:51. We've already read the passage ahead of time, but if you'd like to read it as well, why don't you go ahead and pause the video and do that, and then we'll go ahead and get into discussing.
In this portion, Israel begins to settle into life in the Promised Land as Judah and the two tribes of Joseph claim their inheritances. And Joshua sets up the tabernacle to stay at Shiloh, where he divides the remainder of the land as an inheritance for the remaining tribes of Israel to claim and conquer.
So this portion begins by describing the tribal allotment of the tribe of Judah. The tribe comes to Joshua and says, we're ready to take our inheritance. And so they go along with Caleb, who we read about in the last portion, and they go and they take the area near the south of Israel.
As we talked about in the Torah portions, God had commanded Moses that each tribe's inheritance would be based on the size of their population. So aside from the tribes on the east side of the Jordan, who have already received their inheritance, as we've talked about previously, Judah and the two tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, are the ones with the biggest population and the biggest inheritances. And so Judah's is just massive. And so it's also the southernmost. So Judah ends up basically being on the southern frontier of Israel. They're bordering Egypt, they're bordering Edom, and it also says that their territory is supposed to include the territory of the Philistines. Judah is in a position where throughout Israel's history, they're going to be bordering a lot of foreign nations and in conflict with a lot of foreign nations. And so this really sets the stage for Judah kind of being the focus of a lot of Israel's interactions, which of course paves the way for Judah becoming the most prominent tribe and David, the ruler of Israel, coming forth from the tribe of Judah, just as Jacob had promised Judah would be the ruler of his brothers way over back in Genesis.
Now, in the middle of talking about how the tribe of Judah takes their allotment, it also specifically talks about how Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, takes his inheritance. We had read in the previous portion that Caleb had specifically approached Joshua and said, hey, I'm ready to take my inheritance now. And so this actually describes how that goes. It basically says that Caleb, he goes there and he specifically drives out the three sons of Anak. And so the Anakim, the sons of Anak, they're giants. And so Caleb was like, I'm going to take them because God is with me. And so he drives out these giants. And so by doing that, he ends up taking a city which is called Hebron. And afterwards, there's another city called Kiriath Sefer. And with this town, Caleb specifically says, whoever can conquer the city of Kiriath Sefer, I will give them my daughter as his wife. And so when he says that, it says that Othniel, who is Caleb's nephew, he conquers the city. And it's like, I'm ready for my wife now. And so then Caleb's daughter, now Othniel's wife, also goes to Caleb and asks, can you also give us a field with springs in it, natural springs down in the Negev? And he's like, sure, go ahead. And so Othniel now has a wife and he has his own field. And Othniel will actually later end up being the first judge to lead the people of Israel. We'll actually read this same exact story again in the first chapter of the book of Judges. And then the last thing that we want to note about the tribe of Judah and their inheritance is that it specifically talks about the city of Jerusalem. And interestingly, it says that Jerusalem is a border town for Judah. So it's right at the edge of their tribal allotment. And it specifically says that there were Jebusites living there. So Jebusites were native to Canaan. And the people of Judah weren't able to drive out the Jebusites. So the people of Israel are supposed to be driving out all the inhabitants of Canaan, but here Judah isn't able to. And we'll read more about why the people of Israel weren't able to keep driving out the inhabitants. We'll read that later in Judges. But basically, the Jebusites maintain control of Jerusalem for a really long time, all the way through the Judges period, and they won't even conquer Jerusalem from the Jebusites until the reign of King David. So that's how long Jerusalem is actually not in Israeli hands.
So next we read about the allotment for the people of Joseph. Now, as we had talked about many times previously in the Torah portions, Joseph consists of two whole tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so Joseph gets a double portion because of the blessing that Jacob laid on him, basically giving him the birthright of the firstborn of the sons of Israel, even though he was one of the last born. And so we see that Manasseh and Ephraim both get inheritances. Manasseh actually already had half of an inheritance on the east side of the Jordan, as we've talked about previously. But the other half of Manasseh and Ephraim, they both get large inheritances, and they're kind of mixy with each other, actually. Yeah. But one thing that's specifically of note about Manasseh receiving their inheritance is that it says that the daughters of Zelophehad came in to Joshua and said to him, hey, we need our inheritance too. Do you remember from earlier when Moses had said that we would get an inheritance along with our brothers? Well, it's time. We're getting our inheritance now, so can we have that? Joshua's like, yeah, go ahead. And again, the sizes of these allotments are based on the size of the tribes. And so the number of clans in each tribe determines how many pieces of land they inherit. And so because each of the daughters of Zelophehad gets an inheritance, that gives Manasseh a total of 10 portions just on the west side of the Jordan alone. And so Manasseh has a very large inheritance because God has made them so fruitful in accordance with what Jacob had blessed Ephraim and Manasseh.
Now, one other thing to note is that it says that when the people of Ephraim were taking their tribal allotment, it says that they did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. So the Canaanites live in the midst of Ephraim to this day, and they became forced laborers. So again, like with Judah, where they couldn't drive out the Jebusites in Jerusalem, so also the Ephraimites aren't able to drive out the Canaanites that live in this town. So we're already seeing a pattern where the people of Israel, they aren't able to finish what they started. So that'll be something to pick up when we get to Judges. And it also says something very similar with Manasseh. They couldn't drive out all the Canaanites as well. And then it goes on to say that the sons of Joseph, so Ephraim and Manasseh both, they approach Joshua and they say, you didn't give us enough land. There are two tribes of us. You basically only gave us one allotment. We need more land. And so Joshua says, well, there's a forest right next to you guys' allotment. So why don't you guys just go clear out some forest and live there? And they're like, but the Canaanites are too hard. They have chariots and they have iron and stuff. We can't take it. And so Joshua says, go clear out the forest. You should be able to take care of the Canaanites. Just go. You can have the forest. That should be enough for you guys. And then they're like, okay.
So at this point, Judah has already come to Joshua and been like, hey, can we go get our land? And Joshua said, okay, go for it. And they went out and gotten it. Although they haven't gotten the whole thing yet. There's still territory left to be conquered, and they never conquer it all. But they went ahead and got started. And then Ephraim and Manasseh came to Joseph and they're like, hey, we need more land. Can we get more land? And Joshua was like, absolutely, do it. You can drive out the Canaanites. Go drive out the Canaanites. So Judah and Ephraim and Manasseh, the most multitudinous of the tribes, have already established their inheritance. But the other tribes haven't really. There are still 7 tribes left who need to receive an inheritance. And so currently, all these tribes are still just gathered around Joshua, waiting for Joshua to tell them what to do, instead of going out and getting their inheritances. And so what Joshua does is, with all the people of Israel, he sets up the tent of meeting at Shiloh. And Shiloh is in the middle of Ephraim's inheritance, which is the tribe Joshua is from. And so Joshua sets it up there, and that's going to be its permanent residence for a very long time, for several generations, hundreds of years. That is the place where God's tent will reside.
Shiloh serves the role of what the Torah calls the place where I put my name. That's where the people of Israel need to come to present their burnt offerings. That's where they come to go to the feasts. That's basically the de facto capital of Israel for generations.
Right. And so Joshua is basically setting up This is our capital city. This is the point of assembly. And so all the people gather around. But his goal in calling this gathering is to then disperse them so that they can actually take their inheritances and do what they're supposed to do instead of just following him around. And so it says that at this point, Joshua said to the people of Israel, "How long will you put off going in to take possession of the land, which Adonai, the God of your fathers, has given you?" So despite the fact that Joshua has been leading these people, helping them to obtain the promise, and just going around gaining victory everywhere, showing God is with you, you can receive the promise, the people of Israel have been putting it off. They've just been delaying. Yeah, they're like, we'll just follow Joshua. We've been in our camp wandering around for 40 years. Why stop now? So aside from the tribes on the east side of the Jordan who have already received their inheritance, and the tribes of Judah, Ephraim, and Manasseh who were like, yeah, let's get ourselves some land, these other 7 tribes are just like not receiving the promise, even though it's already been laid out for them. This sounds familiar. This reminds me of when they were at the border of the land. They were like, go in, and they were like, nah, we don't wanna. It's like, why would you not want to receive the promise that God has given you? But it shows some amount of laziness. Like Josiah said, procrastination. They're not willing to fight, even though God is fighting for them. And so Joshua is just like, why are you waiting? Let me kickstart this for you. And so he tells the people of Israel, go survey the land that's left, the land that Ephraim and Judah and Manasseh have not yet claimed, and divide it into 7 parts, and then I'm going to pick for you. Or rather, God is going to pick for you. I'm going to cast lots, and God will direct such that each of you will get one of these 7 portions. Now, again, Joshua is obeying the Torah. This is another Torah command. Moses had specifically said that when they got into the land, they were supposed to divide it up by lot. But obviously not all 12 tribes are getting lots, only the 7 tribes. And that's because 2.5 tribes had already received their inheritance on the east side when Moses had given them that inheritance. And Judah and Ephraim and the other half of Manasseh, so that's the other 2.5, had already claimed theirs. And then the tribe of Levi, of course, has no land inheritance because, as God commanded Moses, their inheritance is God and the service of the priesthood and offering those burnt offerings before God. That's all their inheritance. They don't get a land inheritance besides that. So with Levi accounted for, and Judah and Ephraim and Manasseh and Reuben and Gad, that leaves 7 more tribes. Do I need to list them? I don't think I need to list them. And so they send out men, they take a survey of the land, they split it into 7 parts, and they give a report back to Joshua at Shiloh. And so all the people are assembled at Shiloh for Joshua to cast lots before Adonai and determine where are they going to live.
So now we get to the remaining part of the portion where we're just going through the allotments for those 7 tribes. And we'll try and get through this relatively quickly. But we'll start with the first lot, which falls to Benjamin. So it lays out the borders of Benjamin, and it specifically says this in between Judah and the Joseph allotments. It's specifically right up against Judah. It's bordering Judah. And in fact, one of the towns on the border of Benjamin is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is counted as a Benjaminite city. And again, it says that Jerusalem was controlled by the Jebusites, so the Benjaminites couldn't actually conquer it, even though they tried. But Jerusalem is kind of shared between the 2 tribes. And as we see play out further on in Israeli history, Benjamin allies itself with Judah in the kingdom of Judah, and so their relationship in Israeli history is actually very closely connected, especially because of their geographic location next to each other.
Next, we get to the inheritance of the people of Simeon. And this one is an interesting tribal allotment because the people of Simeon do not get land as an inheritance. Instead, it says their inheritance was in the midst of the inheritance of the people of Judah. And then it goes on to list some cities that they get. But this is the only one of the 12 allotments that is not described as being a territory with borders. Instead, it explicitly says it's within the territory of Judah. The inheritance of Simeon is part of the territory of Judah. They obtained an inheritance in the midst of their inheritance. It says it a bunch of different ways, all to focus on Simeon does not have their own land inheritance. Their cities are part of Judah's inheritance, and Simeon is basically just sharing. Judah had so much land, Simeon got to share a part of it. And so this is actually very similar to the situation of the tribe of Levi, where since they get no land inheritance, they get some cities to live in throughout all Israel. Each tribe basically donates some cities. And so that's a very similar situation to what Simeon is doing here, where they're basically sharing with Judah. And so this is in fulfillment of what Jacob had said way back in Genesis, where he had basically cursed Levi and Simeon and said that they would both be scattered in Israel. And the fulfillment of that is they don't get land inheritances. Instead, they get cities. And those cities are within the rest of Israel's territory. And for Levi, at least, they got the priesthood because they had been faithful in Moses' day, and so they got that blessing. But Simeon doesn't even have that. Simeon just has their little corner of cities within Judah. And of course, Jacob had placed this curse on Levi and Simeon because of what they had done, where they had killed the whole city because they were full of anger and wanted to take vengeance for themselves. And so this just shows that our sin and the things that we do rashly in anger can have very long consequences for ourselves, for others. So we need to make sure that we always consider the consequences of all of our actions.
So then it goes through a bunch of other tribes. We won't really discuss a lot about them, but it goes through Zebulun gets the 3rd lot, Issachar gets the 4th lot, Asher gets the 5th lot, and Naphtali gets the 6th lot. And then the last lot falls to the tribe of Dan. And the reason why we bring up this tribe specifically is because it has the really weird tidbit that it says that the territory of the sons of Dan proceeded beyond them. In ESV, it says that it was lost to them. Basically, it's made clearer in the book of Judges that when the people of Dan tried to take their territory, they weren't able to repel the Canaanites at all, to the point that they lost it. They couldn't enter in. They were repelled and they had to go back to the hill country. And so when they're there without having their tribal allotment, it says that they end up going northward and finding a separate city, and they end up conquering it and calling it the city of Dan. This becomes the northernmost city in the land of Israel, and it's completely separate from the rest of the tribal allotment that belongs to Dan. So they lived in an area that was beyond their tribal allotment, and they weren't really living in their tribal allotment. And so again, this just goes with the same pattern that we've been keeping on seeing, which is that the people of Israel are having a really hard time driving out the remaining Canaanites. And so this kind of sets the stage for the book of Judges, which is that the people of Israel, they're in their land, but things aren't really going well for them. And then finally, this chapter wraps up by saying that Joshua receives his own personal inheritance. Just like how Caleb received an inheritance because he was one of the faithful spies, Joshua was the other faithful spy along with Caleb. And so he ends up getting his own city that he builds in the territory of Ephraim, which is the tribe that he's from. And so with that, Joshua has his own place. The Ark of the Covenant at the tent of meeting is settled in Shiloh, and all the different 12 tribes have a spot for them to live.
And so I think the main takeaway from this portion is don't hesitate to obey God's call. When the people of Israel had entered into the promised land and taken it and subdued the land, Caleb's immediate response was, oh wow, we're in the promised land, time to go get the stuff. And so he and Judah and the tribes of Joseph too, they all were like, let's go get our inheritances. And they went and fought and they won, and they immediately took large amounts of territory and were able to settle. But the other tribes delayed. They put it off. They were like, but we're here right now. Why go be over there? And so because of that, they didn't have their inheritances. And Joshua had to basically push them and say, why are you not possessing the thing that God gave to you. And ultimately, as we'll see later on, they continued to drag their feet. They continued to tolerate the Canaanites and not push them all out, and it caused major problems for them, such that they weren't even able to receive the whole promise. Because they hesitated, because they drew back, they weren't able to receive the full promise. So I think that's something that we all need to take into account, that when God commissions us, when God gives us a call, we need to follow it. If he gives us a blessing, we need to receive it and use it. If God gives us resources, we need to dedicate them to doing his will. We should always be asking ourselves, why are we not receiving what God is giving to us? If God is giving us instructions, we need to receive them. If God is giving us tools, we need to receive them. And that means doing what he tells us to do when he tells us to do it, not putting it off. God has already given us salvation, and he's given us so many blessings where we are now. And that can make it easy to become complacent. But that is the last thing we need to do. We need to always be alert, diligent, ready for God to call us at any time. And wherever God puts us, whatever lot he gives us, we need to accept that as a call to action, as a field in which to fight and to do his will, so that we will receive his promises in their full at the end.
That wraps up this episode of Solid Scripture. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any ideas for future episodes or questions for us to answer, why don't you let us know down in the comments? We would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell to keep updated on new videos. And if you would, please consider sending us a donation to help us make more videos like these. We would really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next week. God bless.